You will not believe what happens to the girl at the end. Make sure to like and subscribe so we can continue writing stories like this one. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.
A letter of hope. The faint fragrance of chamomile, a weak shield against the sickroom's stale air, did little to mask the underlying odor of illness clinging to the small cottage. Eliza moistened a linen cloth in the cool water of the basin, tenderly dabbing her mother's brow. The skin beneath her fingertips felt fragile, like the delicate parchment she favored for her botanical drawings. Each breath was a shallow struggle, a raspy wheeze. "Hush, Ma," Eliza soothed, gently tucking a stray lock of silver hair behind her ear. "Just breathe." A parched cough shuddered through the frail frame, and Eliza flinched, yearning for a touch of honey to ease the rawness. Their last pot had been emptied weeks prior. Stores of every kind were dwindling. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked with unwavering precision, its cadence a taunt to the stagnancy that had gripped their existence. Beyond the cottage walls, the village thrummed with life, the blacksmith's anvil ringing a vibrant song, children's joyous screams bouncing across the green, Mrs. Higgins' hens chattering like gossips in her yard. Inside, however, time had congealed, a dense, oppressive weight. A sharp knock fractured the silence. She lifted the cloth from the basin and hurried to the door, praying it wasn't the physician, back for another demand they couldn't meet. Young Thomas, the postman, stood on the stoop, a missive gripped in his hand. "For you, Miss Eliza," he offered, his cheeks blooming with color. Eliza recognized the crest emblazoned on the envelope, the Ashworth stag. Her spirits plummeted. Another denial. She forced a wan smile for the boy. "Thank you, Thomas." He shuffled nervously. "Right then, Miss Eliza. Good day." Closing the door, Eliza leaned against it, the unopened parchment a leaden weight in her hand. She already knew its contents. She always did. Her unremarkable looks, her retiring nature, these were not commodities prized on the marriage market. At 23, she was verging on spinsterhood in this small community. With a sigh, she tore open the seal. The elegant, stylized script confirmed her apprehensions. Master Ashworth, while acknowledging her merits, had decided to pursue a union more befitting his family's standing. A match with someone fairer, wealthier, more captivating. Eliza crushed the letter in her fist, the paper whispering like brittle leaves. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and unwelcome. She bit down hard, refusing to succumb. Weeping wouldn't aid Ma. She smoothed the crumpled sheet, knowing it could at least serve as tinder. Waste was a luxury they could ill afford. Later, after coaxing a few meager spoonfuls of broth between her mother's lips, Eliza settled by the lamp's meager glow, repairing an old shawl of Ma's. The time-worn fabric provided a small comfort beneath her fingers. Beside her lay a pile of old newspapers destined to become wrapping. Ma had always savored reading them before their descent into utility. Eliza reached for the top paper, a month old, preparing to tear a sheet, when a small notice in the corner snagged her attention. Wanted, wife for rancher in Montana Territory. Must be diligent, flexible, and eager to embrace an adventurous life. Address inquiries to Mr. Caleb Harding, Box 42, Willow Creek, Montana Territory. Montana. The very name evoked images of expansive plains, majestic mountains scraping the heavens, and skies so vast they seemed to devour everything below. A world removed from the quiet rhythms of her current life. A chance for adventure. Eliza's pulse quickened. She reread the advertisement, her fingers tracing the inked words. Diligent? Flexible? She had devoted her life to her mother's care, expertly managing their humble home and stretching meager resources with unparalleled resourcefulness. These qualities she possessed in spades. But a wife for a rancher in Montana? She was plain, rejected, and chained to a sickbed. What could she possibly offer a man seeking a partner in a raw, unsettled land? Yet, a flicker of hope ignited within her, a fragile ember refusing to die. What, truly, did she have to forfeit? Gingerly, she flattened a piece of vellum, dipped her quill in the inkwell, and began to compose her response. She recounted her life in the village, her proficiency in household management, her abiding love of the natural world, and her ability to find beauty in the simplest of things. She omitted any mention of her lack of beauty or her series of failed proposals. Instead, she accentuated her strengths, her resilience, the quiet fortitude she had cultivated deep within. She detailed the medicinal herbs she cultivated in her small garden, the intricate needlework she created in her moments of respite, the way she could encourage even the most recalcitrant seeds to flourish. She poured her very essence into the letter, weaving a rich tapestry of words portraying a woman capable, compassionate, and ripe for a new existence. Upon completing her letter, sealing it with a drip of wax, a sense of tranquility enveloped her. She had done what she could. The outcome rested in the hands of fate, or perhaps in the hands of Mr. Caleb Harding. She inscribed the address on the envelope in her most refined script, her hand betraying a slight tremor. Mr. Caleb Harding, Box 42, Willow Creek, Montana Territory. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added a line beneath it, a silent supplication breathed into the immense unknown, a letter of hope. Hard Luck Ranch. The train lurched across the plains, a steel beast exhaling plumes of black against the boundless azure. Eliza's gaze, fixed on the window pane, followed the land's slow transformation from rolling green to an endless brown tableau. Days dissolved into the train's steady pulse, broken only by brief stops in sleepy towns where she bartered for day-old bread and tepid tea. The stagecoach, if anything, proved a harsher trial. Stuffy with the reek of horse flesh and unwashed bodies, it bucked over deeply rutted tracks that seemed designed to test the limits of human endurance. Eliza gripped the worn strap, jaw tight against the jarring, her resolve a fragile yet persistent ember. Montana was a stark contrast to the idyllic fantasies she'd nurtured. At long last, the stagecoach shuddered to a halt before a time-worn signpost declaring, Hard Luck Ranch. Eliza dismounted, legs trembling, stomach in knots. The air hung thick with the bite of sage and an undertone of something vaguely sour. A figure waited, silhouetted against the descending sun. He was a study in angles and sinew, his face a map of hard-won battles against the elements. Though shadowed by his hat's brim, his eyes seemed to penetrate her, weighing her up. This had to be Mr. Harding. He offered no welcome, only a clipped nod. Eliza? His voice was a low rasp like dry leaves skittering across stone. Yes, sir, she responded, her voice small. He gestured toward a rickety wagon hitched to a weary-looking mule. Get in. Still a stretch to the ranch. The wagon groaned in protest as they moved, the silence a palpable presence between them. Eliza cast sidelong glances at Mr. Harding. He appeared unimpressed. Perhaps regret had already taken root. Perhaps she was destined to fall short of some unspoken standard. As they rounded a bend, the ranch house materialized and Eliza's spirits plummeted. Hard Luck Ranch, a name that spoke volumes. The main house was a shambles, its paint flaking like sunburnt skin, its porch listing precariously. The barn looked ready to collapse under its own weight, and the corrals were choked with weeds. A pervasive sense of neglect hung in the air like a shroud. Well, here it is, Mr. Harding announced, his voice utterly devoid of feeling. Home. Eliza forced down her disappointment. This was it. This was her chance to prove herself. She refused to let the dilapidated surroundings or Mr. Harding's brusque manner break her resolve. She was Eliza Meadowsweet, and surrender was not in her nature. Thank you, Mr. Harding, she replied, her voice gaining strength with each word. I'm ready to start. He grunted, offering no further acknowledgement. He swung down from the wagon and began unloading her few belongings. Eliza watched, her mind already racing, taking inventory of the tasks ahead. The garden lay in ruins, the fences begged for repair, the house demanded nothing short of a miracle. As she set foot on the parched earth of Hard Luck Ranch, a tremor of fear rippled through her. This was not the life she had envisioned. Yet, beneath the apprehension, a spark of defiance flickered. She would carve a home from this wilderness. She would prove her mettle. She would demonstrate to Mr. Harding and to herself that she was more than just a willing pair of hands and a pleasant face. She was a survivor, and she was here to stay. First impressions. The first morning dawned gray, the Montana sky a vast canvas of muted silver. Eliza rose before the sun, her limbs stiff from the long train journey and the unyielding mattress of the guest room. The air in the house was thick with the scent of dust and something indefinably old. She found the kitchen, a cavernous space dominated by a cast-iron stove that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in decades. A single, bare bulb cast a weak light, revealing a scattering of mouse droppings on the counter. Eliza sighed, but a familiar sense of purpose began to bloom within her. She'd faced worse. Rolling up her sleeves, she started with the dishes piled high in the sink. The water heater groaned and sputtered, delivering only lukewarm water tinged with rust. She scrubbed with a vengeance, imagining the grime as the remnants of loneliness and neglect. By the time Mr. Harding shuffled in, his face still creased with sleep, the kitchen was marginally improved. A pot of coffee bubbled on the stove, its aroma a small victory against the pervasive staleness. Morning, he grunted, his eyes flicking over the cleaner surfaces. "Good morning, Mr. Harding," Eliza replied, offering a small smile. "Coffee's ready." He poured himself a cup, his gaze wary. "Didn't expect you to be up so early." "Couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Besides, there's something about a clean kitchen that sets the day right." He grunted again, noncommittal, and retreated to the table with his coffee. Eliza took a piece of bread from a bin and spread it with butter. The bread was stale, but she ate it without complaint. After breakfast, she ventured outside. The ranch yard was a chaos of discarded tools, rusted machinery, and overgrown weeds. A dilapidated barn leaned precariously to one side, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin. Eliza walked toward it, her fingers trailing along the rough-hewn wood. The scent of hay and manure hung heavy in the air. Beyond the barn, she discovered a small, fenced-in garden. Or, rather, what was left of one. Weeds choked the skeletal remains of tomato cages, and withered vines clung to a rotting trellis. But amidst the decay, she saw a few hardy herbs struggling to survive: rosemary, thyme, and a single, determined sprig of lavender. A wave of sadness washed over her. This garden had once been loved. Someone had poured their heart into nurturing it, only for it to be forgotten. She knelt, pulling weeds with a quiet determination. She would bring it back to life. Later that afternoon, as the sun beat down on the parched earth, Eliza found Mr. Harding inspecting a trough near the well. He was frowning, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Having trouble with the water?" she asked, approaching him cautiously. He straightened up, wiping his brow with a calloused hand. "Well's been acting up. Water's lower than usual." Eliza studied the well, her gaze thoughtful. "Have you checked the lining? The stone seems to be cracked in several places. Could be seepage." Mr. Harding stared at her, surprised. "Seepage? How would you know about seepage?" "My father was a stonemason," she explained. "I helped him with his work." He considered this for a moment, his expression softening slightly. "Never thought of that. Always just figured it was the dry weather." He kicked at the parched earth. "Seepage would explain the drop in the water table, though." "It would," Eliza agreed. "If it's not too deep, it might be a simple repair. Some fresh mortar could seal the cracks." Mr. Harding looked at her with a new kind of respect. "Might be worth a try. I've been putting off fixing it with everything else needing doing around here." He paused, a flicker of something akin to hope in his eyes. "You got any experience with mortar?" "Some," she said, smiling gently. "Enough to help, at least." He nodded, a gruff sound of acknowledgement. "All right then. We'll take a look at it tomorrow." He turned and walked away, leaving Eliza standing by the well. She watched him go, a sense of quiet satisfaction filling her. She might be plain, as those other men had so bluntly declared, but she wasn't useless. She had skills, knowledge, and a willingness to work. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to build a life for herself, even in this desolate place. Winning hearts. The sun beat down on Eliza's back as she struggled to maneuver a heavy wooden beam. Rio, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with disapproval, watched her from beneath the brim of his worn hat. He'd been the most resistant to her presence, his loyalty clearly lying with Mr. Harding and the way things had always been. "Need some help there, Miss Meadowsweet?" he finally drawled, the words laced with a skepticism that could curdle milk. Eliza paused, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. "If you wouldn't mind, Mr. Rio, it's proving a bit unwieldy." Rio grunted, but his actions spoke louder than his words. He strode over, his movements fluid and powerful, and together they hoisted the beam into place, reinforcing a section of the corral fence that had been weakened by rot. Eliza noticed the precise way he positioned the wood, the economy of movement, the inherent understanding of the materials. "Thank you," she said, genuinely grateful. "You have a real knack for this." Rio shrugged, his gaze fixed on the fence. "Been doing it since I was knee-high to a grasshopper." Eliza, sensing a small crack in his armor, pressed gently. "Mr. Harding mentioned you've been with him for a long time." "Long enough," he replied gruffly. "You must know the ranch better than anyone." Eliza continued, her voice soft, devoid of any challenge. Rio finally looked at her, his eyes, the color of sun-baked earth, assessing her. "Maybe I do. Then perhaps you could tell me a bit about the cattle?" Eliza asked, seizing the opportunity. "I'd like to learn as much as I can." A flicker of surprise crossed Rio's face. He clearly hadn't expected her to be interested in the practicalities of ranching. He hesitated, then, seemingly against his better judgment, began to explain the different breeds, their strengths and weaknesses, the rhythms of the seasons and their impact on the herd. Eliza listened intently, asking intelligent questions, absorbing every detail. The other ranch hands, initially wary of Eliza, began to thaw as well. Jed, a lanky, good-natured young man, showed her how to properly saddle a horse, patiently explaining the purpose of each strap and buckle. Mateo, quiet and observant, taught her to identify different types of grasses, pointing out which were most nutritious for the cattle. Eliza, in turn, shared her knowledge of herbs and their medicinal properties, offering a poultice for Jed's persistent cough and suggesting a remedy for Mateo's aching back. She mended tears in their shirts with neat, invisible stitches, and her gentle humming filled the air as she worked, creating a sense of peace and tranquility. As dusk settled, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Eliza joined the ranch hands for supper. The meal was simple: beans, stewed tomatoes, and cornbread, but it was shared with laughter and camaraderie. Eliza listened to their stories of roundups and cattle drives, of near misses and daring rescues, her eyes wide with fascination. She learned about their families, their dreams, and their fears. She found herself genuinely enjoying their company. "You're a good listener, Miss Meadowsweet," Jed remarked, leaning back against the bunkhouse wall. "I find people fascinating," Eliza replied with a smile. "Everyone has a story to tell." Rio, who had been unusually quiet throughout the meal, cleared his throat. "You're not afraid of getting your hands dirty, that's for sure." Eliza chuckled. "My father always said hard work never hurt anyone." A ghost of a smile touched Rio's lips. "Your father sounds like a smart man." Later, as Eliza walked back to the main house, the air cool against her skin, she felt a sense of contentment she hadn't experienced in a long time. She was beginning to find her place here, not just as Mr. Harding's wife, but as part of the ranch community. She still had much to learn, but she was eager to embrace the challenges and the opportunities that lay ahead. She had a feeling that this dusty, neglected ranch held more than just hard work. It held the promise of belonging, of purpose, and perhaps even of love. The crickets chirped their evening song, a chorus of approval echoing in the stillness of the night. The Dust Bowl. The wind, typically a playful zephyr teasing the house's edges, had morphed into a brutal adversary. It roared, a sandpaper-rough gale that battered the baked soil and flung ochre clouds into the already murky sky. At the kitchen window, Eliza felt a coil of unease tighten its grip. The drought's stranglehold on Hard Luck Ranch was intensifying, the landscape suffocating. The creek's demise had been the first warning. It had shrunk to a mere dampness, then dust, vanishing entirely, its bed a mosaic of cracked clay. Once plump and vigorous, the cattle were now gaunt and lethargic. Ribs stood out starkly beneath their hides, their moans feeble, a dolorous chorus across the desolate expanse. Even their eyes, once bright, seemed dimmed, devoid of vitality. One morning, Eliza ventured to the pasture, carrying a carefully measured bucket of water from the dwindling well. The gesture was a mere palliative. The cows thronged around her, muzzles pushing at the pail, tongues scraping against the metal with thirsty insistence. She poured what she had, watching them drink with almost frantic need. It remained insufficient, a drop in the face of such desperation. She spotted Mr. Harding overseeing his men attempt to herd the livestock toward a fabled, distant water source. His face bore new, harsh lines of worry, his jaw set with grim resolve. He snapped commands, his voice raspy and sharp. Even Rio, usually unruffled, looked strained, a furrow etched between his brows. "They're failing, Cyrus," Eliza overheard Rio murmur, his voice laced with concern. "Too weak to endure such a journey." Cyrus dragged a hand through his thinning hair, leaving a dusty trail. "We're left with no alternative," he responded, his tone weighted with despair. "Staying means losing everything." Eliza watched them depart, a plume of dust billowing behind the moving mass, swallowing them whole. Helplessness clawed at her, a powerful urge to do something, anything, to ease their suffering. Back at the house, the garden was a scene of devastation. The vibrant green shoots she'd nurtured so lovingly were now shriveled and done, their leaves brittle and curled. Even the resilient wildflowers faltered. Their hues faded to a muted palette. The earth was fractured and parched, a broken promise of life. She attempted to rescue what remained, irrigating the plants with the last reserves from the well, a task as futile as it was heartbreaking. The sun blazed, relentlessly scorching the ground, stealing what little moisture lingered. Within the house, a stifling quiet reigned. Mr. Harding spent his days scouring the range, seeking any sign of respite, returning each evening with the same somber expression. He ate sparingly, spoke even less, retreating into a solitary world. Eliza tried to connect with him, to offer solace, but her words seemed to dissipate, lost in the oppressive atmosphere. One evening, she discovered him seated on the porch, gazing at the forlorn landscape. The setting sun painted long, gaunt shadows across the drought-stricken land. His shoulders sagged with defeat, his face a canvas of despair. "Cyrus," she said quietly, settling beside him. He remained unresponsive, unaware of her presence. She reached out and clasped his hand. His skin was coarse and weathered, his grip slack. "We'll overcome this," she asserted, her voice firm. "We invariably do." He finally turned to her, his gaze filled with a weariness that pierced her. "What if we don't, Eliza?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "What if the signal's the end?" She squeezed his hand reassuringly. "It's not the finale," she replied, her voice unwavering. "It's merely a trial. And together we will triumph." He looked at her, a spark of something akin to hope flickering in his eyes. But it was quickly doused, replaced by his habitual stoicism. He shifted his gaze back to the withering land. The dust swirled around them, a silent, suffocating shroud. Eliza understood that the days ahead would be arduous, far tougher than any she'd previously encountered. But she also knew she would not surrender. She would defend Hard Luck Ranch, the land itself, and the individuals who depended on it. And she would fight for Cyrus Harding, the taciturn, solitary man who had risked everything on her. A forgotten well. Dust devils danced around Eliza's worn boots as she surveyed the perimeter of what was once a promising vegetable garden. Each withered tomato stalk felt like a personal indictment. She'd lavished them with attention, carrying buckets from the dwindling creek, shielding their frail leaves from the scorching rays with burlap, even murmuring words of encouragement. Yet, the sun's brutal siege had prevailed. She drifted further, past the gaunt frame of a scarecrow, its ragged clothes snapping in the arid wind like distressed signals. The vista before her offered no solace. A parched, cracked landscape mirroring their dire straits. Cyrus, meanwhile, had retreated into himself, a leaden silence replacing his usual gruff pronouncements, a change that unsettled her more than any outburst. Then a forgotten image surfaced from the depths of her memory, a neglected corner of the ranch glimpsed during her first explorations. A time-worn stone structure almost swallowed by rampant weeds and thorny thickets. An old well, a fragile tendril of hope unfurled within her, pushing against the heavy weight of despair. It was a long shot, a desperate wager, but they were running out of options. She hastened back toward the house, dust puffing up with each step. Inside, she found Cyrus at the kitchen table, consumed by a map, his face a roadmap of worry. The air hung stagnant, thick with unspoken anxieties. "Cyrus," she began, her voice barely a whisper. He lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot and underlined with fatigue. "What is it, Eliza?" I think I remember something." "An old well, out by the west pasture near the boundary fence." His expression remained impassive. "A well, you say?" "Yes. It looked long abandoned, choked with overgrowth, but maybe we could fix it up." He sighed, a deflated sound that spoke of utter resignation. "Eliza, there's a reason it's been left to rot. That well ran dry 2 decades ago. My pa tried everything under the sun to revive it. Explosives, divining rods, fervent prayers, all for naught. But perhaps—" She pressed, her voice gaining resolve. "Maybe things have shifted. Maybe the water table has changed. We can't know unless we investigate." Cyrus shook his head slowly, raking a hand through his thinning hair. "It's just another cul-de-sac, Eliza. Another fruitless endeavor. We're already stretched to the breaking point. I can't squander our resources chasing shadows. But what alternative do we have?" Eliza implored, a tremor in her voice. "We can't simply stand idly by and watch everything crumble." She approached him, laying a hand on his forearm. His muscles were rigid, clenched with stress. "Please, Cyrus. Just let's go take a look. If it's truly beyond repair, then we'll know we exhausted every possibility." He scrutinized her, his gaze piercing. She saw the bone-deep weariness, the shadow of despair, but also a faint ember, a spark of the resolute man she knew him to be, the man who refused to surrender without a fight. At last, he gave a slow, grudging nod. "All right, Eliza. We'll go see. But temper your expectations." He pushed himself away from the table, his shoulders stooped with defeat. "It's likely just another disappointment waiting in the wings." Eliza followed him outside, her pulse a frantic drumbeat of hope and apprehension. The sun hammered down as they made their way toward the west pasture, the parched earth crackling underfoot. She silently pleaded that the well, obscured by the cloak of weeds and neglect, held more than just the ghosts of dashed hopes. She prayed that it contained water. Hope restored. Cyrus remained slumped on the porch swing, the wood groaning softly beneath his weight. Eliza knelt before him, her hand resting lightly on his knee. "Cyrus, we have to try. We can't just give up." He looked at her, his eyes mirroring the cracked earth stretching to the horizon. What's the point, Eliza? I've told you that well's been dry for 20 years. Bone dry, a waste of time and effort. But things change, she persisted, her voice soft but firm. Maybe something shifted, maybe there's a little water now. We won't know unless we look. She gestured towards the empty fields. We have nothing to lose, and everything to gain. Cyrus sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you. He pushed himself up from the swing, his movements slow and deliberate, like an old machine creaking back to life. Eliza's face brightened. Thank you, Cyrus. The abandoned well was located on the far edge of the property, nestled amongst a copse of cottonwood trees, their leaves now brittle and brown. The wooden frame surrounding the well was weathered and rotten, the rope frayed and useless. As they approached, a rusty windlass squealed in protest. See, Cyrus said, his voice laced with oblique satisfaction. Even the well wants to stay dead. Eliza ignored him. We'll need to clear this debris first, she said, already surveying the area. She started gathering fallen branches and rotting leaves, tossing them into a nearby pile. Cyrus watched her for a moment, then, with another sigh, joined in. Soon, the other ranch hands, sensing a shift in the air, began to gather. Miguel, his face etched with concern, asked, Senor Harding, what are we doing here? We're going to see if there's any water in this old well, Cyrus replied, his voice still tinged with skepticism. A murmur rippled through the group. They knew the well's history, its reputation for being as dry as the desert wind. Old man Hemlock, his eyes twinkling with an almost mischievous glint, hobbled forward, leaning heavily on his gnarled walking stick. The old gal needs a bit of coaxing, he said, his voice raspy. I remember when this well was the heart of the ranch. Fed us all, man and beast. He paused, his gaze distant. Then the earth shifted, or so they say. Dried up overnight. Do you think it can be fixed, Mr. Hemlock? Eliza asked, her eyes full of hope. Hemlock stroked his long, white beard, considering. Everything can be fixed, child. Just needs a little know-how and a whole lot of elbow grease. He pointed to a pile of rusted tools near the well. First, we'll need to get those timbers reinforced. Then, we'll need to find a new rope and bucket. Cyrus, seeing the renewed energy in the faces around him, felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He straightened his shoulders and said, Miguel, fetch the lumber from the barn. Javier, see if you can find a length of rope strong enough to hold a full bucket of water. The ranch hands sprang into action, their movements purposeful and determined. The air buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose. The rhythmic clang of hammers and the creak of wood filled the air, a stark contrast to the silence of the past weeks. Eliza worked alongside them, her sleeves rolled up, her brow furrowed in concentration. She helped reinforce the wooden frame, her small hands surprisingly strong. She asked Hemlock countless questions, absorbing his knowledge like a sponge. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the parched land, the well was starting to resemble its former self. The wooden frame was sturdy, the rope was securely fastened, and a new bucket hung ready to be lowered into the depths. Cyrus watched them, a strange mix of apprehension and anticipation swirling within him. He knew the odds were stacked against them. But he also saw the determination in Eliza's eyes, the unwavering belief that things could get better. And for the first time in a long time, he wanted to believe it too. Water of life. The sun beat down relentlessly, turning the earth to powder and the air thick with shimmering heat. Dust devils danced across the parched fields, mocking their efforts. Eliza, her face smudged with grime and sweat plastering her hair to her forehead, wiped her brow with the back of her hand. The well was proving to be a stubborn beast. Another cracked beam, Hemlock grumbled, tossing the rotted timber onto the growing pile of debris. This whole thing's liable to collapse on us. Cyrus, who had been silently observing, his shoulders slumped with a familiar air of defeat, finally spoke. Maybe it's a sign, Hemlock. A sign we should just let it be. It's been dry for 20 years. What makes us think it'll ever give again? Eliza stepped forward, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. Because we're trying, Cyrus. Because we haven't given up. She picked up a replacement beam, seasoned oak she'd insisted on hauling from the barn, and offered it to Hemlock. This one's solid. Let's see if it fits. The men worked in a rhythm born of desperation and a shared hope fueled by Eliza's unwavering optimism. They hauled buckets of rubble, shored up weakened walls, and wrestled with rusty machinery. Each setback was met with a renewed surge of determination, each small victory celebrated with a shared glance and a grunt of satisfaction. Eliza, though smaller in stature than the men, moved with purpose and efficiency. She mixed mortar, sharpened tools, and offered suggestions gleaned from her father's carpentry workshop back in Pennsylvania. She seemed to have an innate understanding of mechanics, a knack for figuring out how things worked and, more importantly, how to fix them. As the days bled into one another, fueled by strong coffee and even stronger will, a sense of camaraderie grew among the crew. Jokes were shared, stories were told, and the silence that had hung heavy over Hardluck Ranch for so long began to dissipate. Even Cyrus seemed to thaw, his gaze softening whenever it rested on Eliza. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the bottom of the well. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something almost forgotten, the promise of water. "The pump," Hemlock said, his voice hoarse. "Let's see if the old girl still has any fight left in her." The pump was a monster of rusted iron and corroded gears. Eliza, with Hemlock's guidance, meticulously cleaned and oiled each part, coaxing it back to life. Cyrus watched, his expression a mixture of skepticism and cautious hope. With a final clang and a groan, the pump sputtered, coughed, and then fell silent. Disappointment hung heavy in the air. "Damn it," Cyrus muttered, turning away. But Eliza wasn't ready to give up. She examined the pump, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The gasket," she said, pointing to a cracked piece of rubber. "It's not creating a seal. We need to replace it." A search through the ranch's cluttered storage shed yielded a piece of thick leather. Eliza, using a sharp knife and a steady hand, carefully fashioned a new gasket. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. With the new gasket in place, they tried again. This time, the pump groaned louder, its rusty joints protesting with each revolution. Then, a gurgle, a sputter, and finally a trickle of muddy water. Eliza held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The trickle grew stronger, turning into a steady stream. Then, with a roar that echoed through the silent landscape, a torrent of clear, cold water gushed from the well. A cheer erupted from the weary crew. They splashed each other, drank deeply, and laughed with a joy that was both profound and cathartic. Cyrus stood back, his eyes wide with disbelief, a slow smile spreading across his face. He looked at Eliza, his gaze filled with a gratitude he couldn't express in words. The water flowed, filling the troughs, irrigating the fields, and breathing life back into Hardluck Ranch. The cattle, gaunt and listless just days before, drank their fill, their sides swelling with renewed vigor. The parched earth drank deeply, turning from cracked and barren to a rich, fertile brown. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Eliza stood beside Cyrus, watching the water flow. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "Thank you, Eliza," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved us." She squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with a happiness she had never known. "We saved ourselves, Cyrus," she said softly. "Together. A thriving community." The resurrected water wasn't a mere rush, it was a pledge fulfilled. Eliza observed the arid earth imbibe greedily, the bleached soil darkening into fertile richness. Overnight, Hardluck Ranch underwent a metamorphosis. The kitchen garden burgeoned, drooping branches straightened, and even the cattle serenaded the dawn with contented bellows. News traveled fast. It was more than irrigation, it was about Eliza. Neighboring ranchers, initially dubious of Cyrus's mail-order bride, began appearing at the ranch house, hats clutched respectfully, seeking her counsel. First came Mrs. Abernathy, her celebrated rose bushes reduced to thorny skeletons, worry creasing her brow. Eliza, never boastful, listened with patience, suggesting a specific fertilizer her grandmother had favored in Pennsylvania. Within days, Abernathy's roses erupted in bloom, more vibrant than before. Next was Mr. Henderson, whose apple orchard suffered under a siege of pests. Eliza, recalling a homemade remedy from an antique journal, demonstrated the creation of a concoction, soap, water, and a hint of garlic. The invaders retreated as if banished by a charm, leaving the fruit to thrive. Eliza's unassuming competence and practical wisdom, gleaned from both books and lifelong attentiveness, astounded them. She was not merely a pretty face but a fountain of solutions. Cyrus watched, his features softening with a burgeoning pride. He noted the changed way the other ranchers regarded her, no longer with condescension but with genuine respect. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset splash the horizon with fire and gold, Eliza voiced an idea. "We should host a fair," she proposed, her tone gentle yet resolute. "A community fair, right here at Hardluck. A chance for everyone to showcase their skills, share their harvest." Cyrus arched a brow. "A fair? Here? Eliza, it's been ages since we've had a gathering." "Not since," His voice faltered, the ghost of past disappointments hanging unspoken. That's precisely why we need one, Eliza countered, her eyes alive with purpose. To celebrate our perseverance, our togetherness. To prove hard luck isn't synonymous with hardship anymore. Seeing the spark in her gaze, Cyrus acquiesced. He understood deep down that she was right. The drought had been a crucible, but also a catalyst. Preparations for the fair transformed hard luck into a whirlwind of activity. Eliza, possessing innate organizational acumen, delegated duties with quiet grace. She supervised the stall construction, designed amusements for the children, and even coaxed Old Man Hemlock into judging the pie contest. The women baked, the men hammered, and the children chased dreams through sun-drenched fields. The day of the fair dawned crystalline and brilliant. Ranchers arrived from distant corners of the valley, their wagons brimming with bounty, livestock, and handcrafted treasures. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation, echoing with laughter, and scented with the savory aroma of freshly baked goods. Eliza, in a simple calico dress, moved among the crowd with understated elegance, greeting each person with a sincere smile. She watched children reveling in games of skill, women admiring each other's handwork, and men exchanging tales over steaming mugs of cider. Hard luck, once a symbol of barrenness, radiated hope and fellowship. As dusk descended, painting long shadows across the grounds, Cyrus found Eliza by the well, watching the water gleam in the fading light. He approached her, his heart overflowing with unspoken gratitude. "Eliza," he began, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say." She turned to face him, her eyes reflecting understanding. "You don't need to say anything, Cyrus." But he needed to. He needed her to know the profound impact she'd had. "You resurrected this place," he said, gesturing to the lively scene. "You brought hard luck back from the brink. And you resurrected me." He reached for her hand, his rough fingers gently lacing with hers. "I misjudged you, Eliza. I believed you were too fragile for this life. But you are, without a doubt, the strongest woman I know." He hesitated, drawing a breath. "And you're beautiful, Eliza. Not only outwardly, but here," he tapped his chest, "deep within your heart." Eliza's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she smiled. It wasn't the extravagant declaration she may have once dreamed of, but it was genuine. It was authentic. And it held all she had ever desired. "Thank you, Cyrus," she whispered, her voice catching. He pulled her close, enfolding her in his arms. "Thank you, Eliza," he murmured, his voice earnest and low. "For everything." Standing there, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, Eliza knew she had found her sanctuary at Hard Luck Ranch. She had discovered her community, her purpose, and, above all, she had found love. The drought had tested their limits, but Eliza Meadowsweet had shown them how to rise above it, stronger and more resilient than before. And Hard Luck Ranch, once a testament to despair, now stood as an emblem of hope, tenacity, and the unwavering spirit of a woman who had unearthed her true belonging in the heart of Montana.